And we'll jump in. So we're in the Philokalia. I think we'll probably finish today, but I wanted to reread the last two paragraphs that we studied last week. We've already talked about them, so we won't spend a whole bunch of time. But it's very important information, very important instructions for our practice. So he says we're on page 158 of this book, the Philokalia, on prayer of the heart. And we're studying Saint Simeon, the new theologian, and his three methods of awareness or attention and prayer. And he's already gone through the three different methods, or I like to think of them as sequences of growth in prayer. And now he's saying at the end, kind of his summing things up, he says, in a word, he who does not have attention in himself and does not guard his mind cannot become pure in heart, and so cannot see God. That seems like a rather important piece of information. If it's the one thing that blocks us from being able to purify the heart or purify the mind, which is what? Removal of me and mine. That's what purification is. It's the removal of me and mine from ourselves. And that me and mine is the result of egoism, the result of basing our sense of ourself on the changing, on the senses, and on the mind. And so if we don't have this awareness within us, this awareness of awareness, which is the presence of God, the presence of the divine, God, Satchitananda is that existence. And so our I am, our being, is the presence of God. And being aware of that presence, being aware of awareness, as Ramana Maharshi would say, is the means of purification. Again, because we talked about Swami Prabhupada and his famous quote that's helped me immensely, where he said, the knots of Maya will untie themselves when placed in the light of awareness. And so this practice of inner awareness for the Jnana, it's just becoming aware of your isness inside and silencing the mind. For the Bhakta, it's becoming aware of the presence of God within you, the image of the divine. And the stillness within is that presence. It is the unchanging absolute presence of God within. And so it's knowing this, it's becoming aware of this, that will purify us of this egoism, and consequently allow us to experience the divine, allow us to see God, to see the divine. Without it, God absolutely cannot be seen. And so that's why something so obvious is not apparent to us, because we're in our noisy mind, keeping it noisy, enjoying it as noisy. So in a word, he who does not have attention in himself and does not guard his mind cannot become pure in heart, and so cannot see God. He who does not have attention in himself cannot be poor in spirit, cannot weep and be contrite, nor be gentle and meek, nor hunger and thirst after righteousness, nor be merciful, nor a peacemaker, nor suffer persecution for righteousness' sake. So the reason he would say all of that is because all of those things are contrary to ego. Egoism is serving body and mind. And so all of those virtues here require a renunciation of body and mind, require a renunciation of ego. And so if we don't have that awareness inside that helps us to mitigate an ego and to separate our identity from said ego, from the senses and from the mind, from the body, then our virtues will all be self-seeking. So even if they look like peacemaking, even though they look like service, they're being done from a motive of self-aggrandization or just some sort. There's always a result being expected if the ego is in charge, if the ego is identified with as being who we are. Speaking generally, it is impossible to acquire virtue in any other way except through this kind of attention, this becoming aware of your nature and sitting in the presence of the divine within, and shining that light on on the mind and on your thinking, separating from your thought and watching it, separating yourself in every way from the different thoughts as they cross the mind, as they come out of nothing and return to nothing. Therefore, you should try to gain this more than anything else, so as to learn what I tell you in your own experience, right? So spiritual life, religion is experience, it's realization. It's coming to a knowledge of an actuality. It's not a philosophy to be learned. It's not a way of life to be learned. It's actually realization, experience, coming to know things truthfully, clearly, through seeing things as they are, without the selfish mind, the partial mind, the ignorant mind. If you wish also to learn how it should be done, I will tell you this. You should observe 3 things before all else. So these are the 3 things that you have to start with. 1, freedom from all cares. That's like, okay, to get this math degree, the first thing to do is calculus. So it's a challenging tall order. But when something like this, which seems almost ridiculously difficult, is said so matter-of-factly, it just means look closer at it. There's an implication, so that the words are pointing toward a practice, and a practice is pointing toward a reality. He says you should observe 3 things. Freedom from all cares, that's surrender. That's surrender to the perfection of the moment. That's seeing the moment as divine. That is separating from the mind and allowing past to not be identified with yourself. So letting go of your story, right? Because it's the past and the memory of the past and the rehashing of the past that creates your desires, or creates your cares, creates the things that you are worrying or wanting about. Not only cares about bad and vain, but even about good things. Or in other words, you should become dead to everything, which is what happens when you realize that you're not the body and not the mind. Then you serve them out of reverence for them as a temple, but not out of a love of self. You see, or a love of your ego self, not out of an arrogance. You see, so the body becomes, you take care of it because it houses the divine. It's the temple. So you take care of the temple like you take care of a church, or you take care of the temple, as it were. Have your karma yoga days where you fix up the body, take care of it. Your conscience should be clear in all things. So that higher self, you should be able to say, I'm doing my best. You should be able to say that I'm doing my practice, that I'm being earnest and I'm being sincere in my efforts to clean up my egoism, and to surrender to the moment, and to find God in that bliss of being. So your conscience should be clear in all things, so that it denounces you in nothing. So there'll be no guilt. There'll be no feelings of that you're of fear trying to cover, or shame. When you sit down to do your practice and you open yourself up to the beloved, to the divine, there's no recoiling inside. There's no having to avoid that honesty because there's things you're not dealing with inside. So it's a tall order. And you should have complete absence of passionate attachment, so that your thought inclines toward nothing worldly, right? No attachment to thought, no passionate attachment. But it's unnecessary to say that because attachment causes passion. So even if the attachment's not a passionate attachment to begin with, it's going to lead to that passion as soon as it's exercised. And so this attachment to thought, the attachment to the world of ideas, is what we have to let go of. So we really have to do some real work with this inner attention, this inner awareness, lots of discernment, and watching the mind very closely. And through that and our experience of that, we become aware of the fact that it is not us. that it is an automatic thing that just runs according to samsara, just circles round and round. And so we let go of our attachments, so we're not inclined to things of the changing. We're not depending on the changing world to identify ourselves. And that is wisdom for us. So your thoughts incline towards nothing worldly. Keep your attention within yourself. All right? Keep your attention within. Where? In the shrine of the heart. In that unchanging absolute within, that noun of love, which is the divine, that noun of wisdom, which is the divine, and that noun of existence. I say noun because there's no movement there, because it's perfect, perfectly balanced. So there's no wavering. So this is where we place our attention. This is where we keep ourselves centered. So that, like we talk about, when you're walking down a busy street, you're seated here in the chariot, and you're more aware of the inner peace that's watching change, that's noting the changing world all around you, and you're watching the changing mind, but you're not in the changing mind. You're not in the changing world. You're here observing it all with an equanimity, with a calmness, knowing its distance from you, knowing its nature to be thought alone, and knowing yourself to be utterly safe, utterly pure, utterly blissful, immortal, and ever free. All right, so keep your attention within yourself, not in your head, but in your heart, the shrine room, the drawing room of God. As Thakur says, the heart of the devotee is the drawing room of God. It's where God and you meet, and where God is enjoyed by you. So you silence the thoughts, you place your attention in the heart, and you become aware through implication, through whatever. It's hard to say, because it's part of that package that we talk about, where it's not objectified. The experience is not objectified. Bliss happens in that space. Why is bliss happening? That's not a valid question, because your nature is bliss. So it's not that bliss is happening. It's that in the silence, you're becoming aware of your blissful nature, and it's becoming apparent to you. And the same thing will happen with wisdom. You will become aware of your nature as wisdom, not as thought, not as a sequence of learned thinking, but in a spontaneous experience of knowing, because that's your nature. So keep your attention within yourself, not in your head, but in your heart. Keep your mind there, in the heart, trying by every possible means to find the place where the heart is, in order that, having found it, your mind should constantly abide there. Now, this is the trouble. This is the what I think is the riddle of God, because search for the heart with all of your might and find it so that you can establish yourself there. That's what we're trying to do. That's realization, to come to that place, to know ourselves as that, and to exist in that space, to be established in that space. That's our realization. What makes it difficult is that space cannot be objectified, because that space is the home of that which is searching for that space. And that's why surrender is the only means. By letting go of everything, letting go of all that you think needs to be done, letting go of all of the ideas that need to be learned, letting go of the notion that you're going to find something by putting it in front of you and going to look for it. It's coming to realize that you already are there, by any means possible. And that's the riddle, because we've never learned anything that way before. We've never done anything that way before, because it's that catch-22. It's not a doing, because it's already done. It's not an acquisition, because it's already yours. It's not something that is composed, because it's your fundamental nature. It's not something that you get, because it's something that you are. So you see, we don't know how to deal with that. That's because we're addicted to our attachments, addicted to our thinking, addicted to our idea of ourself as ego self. And the ego self knows how to do all of those things as the doer. But when it's faced with undoing its own self, when it's faced with undoing and not doing, it doesn't like that. And it gets quite challenging. And so it will stir up all kinds of dust as you sit there trying to implicitly touch that divine nature within.
So Maharaj, I have a question.
Yes, 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 yes.
So I would say that it's the same thing where Ramana Maharishi says to go to the source. When you say, "Who am I?" and he says, find the place and go back to the source. Or Nisargadatta Maharaj says, who were you before you were born? Go to that place. Now, uh, one may touch the place for a bit, but it's hard to abide there, right? Would you have any suggestions? Because nobody really gives any pointers as to how to abide other than go there again and again and again, as many times as possible. And but sometimes I find, Thakur's japa is also happens in the same place. We put the image in the heart, right, as we meditate. Or the japa also originates from there. Would you think that any of these other things, or Om, which is the first sound after, would you suggest putting the two together sometimes if it helps? Or would you say no, keep those separate? I know of some swamis who say no, just keep them separate, but I don't know. Sometimes I think it helps.
Yeah, I absolutely, of course, without having talked to those swamis who say keep them separate, uh, no, absolutely. I would absolutely say no, don't keep them separate at all. If it's helpful, do it, absolutely. Because you understand the relationship between them. If you thought that jnana was this and bhakti is this, and jnana demotes your bhakti or destroys your bhakti, if you've got that kind of approach to it, that kind of thinking, then it's not going to work for you. But if you can cross-reference the two and understand that the self that the jnani is seeking is the beloved that you're seeking, that the bhakta is seeking, then there's absolutely no problem with using the practices to enhance each other. Now, part of our trouble is that we think we're going somewhere, or that we have arrived at something within that we now have to maintain somehow, which is wrong thinking, because you've never left that place. You can't be anywhere else, and you never have been anywhere else. So it's merely getting lost in the world of thought that tells
Right.
us that we're somewhere else, or that we're not this or we're not that. And so there's a little trick of the mind there. It's ignoring any information or any indication that's happening in the mind that we're not where we want to be. And it's through that not disassociation, because that's repression, but through that aloofness, through that awareness of the whole as opposed to the particular. Through that practice, we come to become aware, because we're no longer focusing on individual changes in the thoughts or in the mind or in the world. And because we've not specified our attentions, it sort of, in a way, you could say it like opens up more like a satellite dish as such. And in that sensitivity, we become aware of these subtle things. We become aware of where we are sitting, that we are sitting in a silent, unchanging space, which is what allows us to experience a noisy, cacophonous mind. That if we weren't in a silent space, we couldn't notice the noise. If we weren't in a still space, we couldn't notice the changing, the movement. And so it's putting the attention on that silence and that unchanging, and removing the attention from the changing and the noisy. And that's how we come to know where we have always been. And that's how we come to see God in that subtlety. God becomes obvious, becomes apparent to us.
Yeah.
So there's not really, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, so there's not really a going and maintaining. That's going to excite the mind. That's going to excite methods of doership. which are the thing itself that's blocking us. That's the veil. And so it sounds very odd, but we come to our realization by refusing anything else as being true, and then alone are we realized. So it's very subtle, but fortunately, Mother's grace allows us to have a lot of enjoyment with her in that interior space long before we're realized. It's not such a I mean, it is the most important thing to have our realization, but we shouldn't be graspy toward it, like, oh, I've got to realize God, I've got to. That's not how it should be. It should be, let me realize my realization. Let me sit in my silence and come to know what is, like that. Because that frenetic doership, or that panic of needing to accomplish, or needing to be earnest, or needing to be sincere, or needing to do any of these things, that's what blocks us. And that's what gives us the illusion that it's somewhere we need to go and then balance very carefully to stay there. But it's not balancing to stay there. It's surrendering everything else, so that in that subtlety of silence, we can know that we are there. We can experience being, which at that subtle level is not really experience, but it is good enough for language. So,
but I find odd that Philokalia, I always thought it was a very, very like God-oriented, but it's speaking such, like, you wouldn't know whether you are reading Vedanta or whether you're reading a Christian.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. That's one of the reasons I'm so charmed by it. And what is leading this whole idea that religion is not a plural.
Yes.
Because I'm very surprised to find such Jnanic ideology in the middle of one of the most bhakti-oriented texts that you could come up with,
Yeah, thank you.
And it's couched in that way, but it's wonderful. So he says, keep your mind there in the heart, trying by every possible means to find the place where the heart is, in order that, having found it, your mind should constantly abide there. Wrestling thus, the mind will find the place of the heart. This happens when grace produces sweetness and warmth in prayer. Yeah, that's the presence of the divine. When you begin to approach that silence, when you begin to approach that inner awareness, you become aware of where, I was going to say, you become aware of where God enters you. That space where that divine, unchanging absolute comes into the world of change, and hence the movement, hence the dream, hence the activity, the stories. And when in that subtleness, when you become aware for the first time, it's like, it'll be something akin to an electric shock, but it's not electricity, it's pure love. It's a love, an unadulterated love, a love that's pure. So it's crystalline, powerful. I mean, just it knocks us over almost, with that touch. And when that happens, Thakur says that when that happens, the mind goes, oh, hey, what's this? And suddenly it becomes much easier, because the mind is no longer that way. The mind is now cooperating. The mind is like, hey, there's something here. And we sit by the stream, as it were, with Krishna while he plays the flute. And what is the flute? The flute is the changing world. So we sit there in the lap of Krishna as he plays the changing world for us. In it we see him. We see all of his love and all of his wonder dancing before us in a constant, unrepeating stream of change, which is the story of love infinite and full. And so we look for that. We find that place where this fountain of the divine comes in and enters the changing world. And we sit there with the beloved as he plays the flute for us, charming us with the changing world, knowing that it is not us. It's the manifestation of the beloved in whose arms we are laying by the stream in the meadow of paradise within. Wrestling thus, the mind will find the place of the heart. This happens when grace produces sweetness and warmth in prayer. From that moment onward, oh God, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by that idea that Mother just put in the head of the flute being the changing world, and just sitting there with Krishna and having him play the flute of the changing for us. That hit me pretty deep. That's quite beautiful. Wow, that's really something. From that moment onward, from whatever side a thought may appear, the mind immediately chases it away. Okay. This silence of the mind is the real thing. We're not making it up. Here it is. He says, from that moment onward, from whatever side a thought may appear, a thought appearing in its infancy. We've talked about that when a thought first appears, it's just barely a spark. It doesn't even have, it's not even fully manifest. It doesn't have a full definition yet. And in the subtle state of that silence with the beloved, you watch it rise from the fire of eternity, the fire of nothingness. You see that spark arise. And in that state, the mind withdraws from it, and it doesn't even mature. It just runs its course early, goes back into nothingness. And that's the pure mind, and that's the place of strength, because normally we're not even aware of a thought when it's in that spark mode. We have to wait until it's fully matured. And even then, most of us don't catch it until it's already started to go and grab some of its related friends, and it produces a state of being for us, a state of blindness, because in that state we can't see and experience the subtle. And by subtle, I mean the unchanging, the things that don't grab attention. And so he says, from that moment onward, from whatever side a thought may appear, the mind immediately chases it away before it has had time to enter and become a thought or an image, destroying it by Jesus's name, that is, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy upon me. So destroying it by the mantra, destroying it by that which indicates the presence of that silence and infinity within, that's pregnant with all knowledge and all love, the experience of existence itself. So when we see that tiny spark come off of the infinite, the mind immediately snuffs it out by returning to the name, by returning to the presence, by placing its attention again on that which is indicated by the mantra. And that's a subtle difference, which I think is important, is that when you say the mantra, it's not the saying of the mantra that you're focusing on. You're saying that, but you're paying attention to what is indicated by the name, which is the divine itself, but which cannot be objectified. And so you just feel you become aware of its implication. You become aware of what the name is pointing at, but that name is pointing at the you of you. So it can't be put in front of you. It has to be subtly sensed through unity, really. And the indications of this unity are this warmth and this bliss that naturally, that we become aware of, that we begin to see as the mind silences and as we withdraw from our identity of the senses and of the body. Moreover, from that moment, a man conceives hatred of the demons and anger against them, constantly battles with them and vanquishes them. These demons, that's just the ego is the big demon. But then, all of our samskaras that have crystallized into habits that are there waging war all the time, instead of loving them and wishing that they would win, wishing that we could enjoy all of those things, which is an early stage of spirituality, we see them for what they are. We realize their worthlessness, and they become like mosquitoes to us. They're not attractive. We're not battling them because we want them, but we realize that this is what has prevented me from enjoying life all along. This is what has prevented me from being able to love people around me as I wanted to all along. This is what has robbed me of my inner bliss and my happiness in life. This is what has made me old and cantankerous and restricted and angry. I don't want these things. And so we begin to really not want them. I would take a little bit of issue with this, with his idea of getting anger against them and whatnot like that, because that's just employing mind again, which is going to cause more trouble. But it really is an emphatic effort to remain established and to not let our eyes be taken off of that which is our fulfillment, our integration as a whole. As to other results, which usually come from this work, with God's help, you will learn them from your own experience, you see, because at this state, the inner guru can be heard. The inner guru, the truth teller, can be heard. You're willing to hear the truth at this state. You're not trying to protect your ego anymore. You're not trying to protect your personality or the things that you think you love and want. And so once you've released those things and stopped protecting them, then you can hear truth, the subtle truth. You won't be fighting the truth. You won't be trying to bend the truth into your own whim, which none of us would do that consciously, but all of us are doing it unconsciously. All of us have that built into us. By keeping your mind attentive and in your heart holding Jesus, that is his prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. One of the Holy Fathers says, sit in your cell and this prayer will teach you everything. The mantra will teach you everything. The mantra will bring you to the divine. That's why we get it. When you're initiated, at that moment, the snake has bitten you, the cobra has bitten you, Thakur says. And so from the moment you say that mantra for the first time, it's just a matter of time now, nothing else. It's just a matter of time before you come to your realization. And so that's a beautiful thing. So that mantra will teach you, will lead you all the way to the divine. Use it often and in as many ways as possible. And get your habit, your internal habit, to be that name echoing through, because the mantra and God cannot be separated. That's a very beautiful and important thing to grow your faith in. The mantra and God cannot be separated. They are one and the same thing. The name cannot be separated from what it indicates, and that which it indicates cannot be separated from the name. So if you're saying the name, no matter how you feel or what you think, you are invoking the presence, and you can sit in that presence, and you can be bold in that presence. You can be comfortable in that presence because of the promise of unconditioned love and because of the promise of grace. And Elizabeth, you have your hand up on purpose?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I had a question real quick. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
No.
I'm worried I'll forget it. I was told I think my understanding's wrong. I thought that the mantra was only supposed to be used on a asana. That's not correct?
No.
Oh.
Well, let me back up. Did your guru say that to you?
It was in a booklet that I'm not supposed to show anybody, but that's just the cover page, so that should be fine, right? Yeah.
And
so
we're like-minded folks, so it's all right.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Since you just took initiation, why don't you clarify that with your
Oh
teacher?
yeah. Okay.
Your guru.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yeah, because it may be important for something that he's working with in you that I know nothing about. So in the long run, the idea is the mantra runs all the time in the mind. So that's where it ultimately goes. But if if that's the teaching right now, it's important to go by it, and to if you want to understand it, your guru will know, and that's important for everybody to know. I'm not a guru, and so I'm not in there with the nuts and bolts of your practice and your spiritual life. If I say something different from your teacher absolutely trumps anything that I say. Absolutely. And if you want clarity, then absolutely go to your teacher. And if I need to explain something to you, then for sure go to me. But your practice and your guru remain intimately connected through everything that we talk about here. So all these things can be used as long as they're in tune with what your guru is saying. And if they're different and you still want to do them, then work with your guru for that. Don't change your practice from what you might be learning here without checking with your teacher. All right, that's always that is important. All right.
Swami, there's a question about what's an asana.
Oh, an asana is just a small. You see, this is I'm not the one to ask about all these external things. The asana is that small pillow or carpet or animal skin that you sit on to do your practice. There are some. Let me see. I don't have. I kind of poo-poo most of this stuff. When my friend Bill was going to another Hindu society, when they got started, they made him have this special grass and then this special silk thing and a special pillow that had to, because it was protecting him from the bad energies in the earth coming up into him while he was meditating. And so they spent a lot of energy on that. And there's a lot of religious science behind that kind of thing. And so, that's not my path, and it's I wouldn't be able to take any of that seriously myself. So I'm just obviously on a different course than that. But I feel like it's important if somebody is on that path, and if someone's teacher is taking them along that path. I don't want my attitudes to infect that. So I would say it is important, and it is respectable and necessary if your teacher is guiding you that way, to definitely do those things. But that's when asana is basically what you sit on to do your practice. And in the old days, it used to be like a lion skin or a tiger skin or a deer skin even that they would sit on to do that. So, all right, let's jump in here. So now, after the Holy Father says, sit in your cell and this prayer will teach you everything, a question is raised that says, but why cannot the first and second methods of attention and prayer produce this? So those first and second methods that we're talking, that's just that open talking to God, was the first one. And the second was just doing what do they call the Lila Dhyan, just thinking about the play of God, the scriptures, keeping the mind in a positive place. Why won't those two things take us here? And he says, because we use them wrongly. St. John of the Ladder, likening these methods to a ladder with 4 rungs, says, some tame passions and become humble, others psalmodize, that is, pray with their lips, and yet others practice mental prayer, and others rise to contemplation. Those who undertake to climb by these rungs do not begin with the top and then go down, but start from the bottom and go upward, stepping first on the first rung, then on the second, and then on the third, and finally on the fourth. So he's confirming here what I was feeling about the 3 methods of prayer, that they're not just 3 methods of prayer, but that they are a contiguous graduation from one to the other on our way to contemplation, on our way to inner communion. The method by which one who wishes it may raise himself from the earth and rise to heaven is as follows. First, he must wrestle with his mind and tame his passions. Second, he must practice psalmody, that is, to pray with the lips. For when passions are subdued, prayer quite naturally brings sweetness and enjoyment, even to the tongue, and is accepted by God as pleasing to him. Third, he must pray mentally. And fourth, he must rise to contemplation. The first is appropriate to beginners, the second to those who have already achieved some measure of success, the third to those drawing nigh to the last rungs of achievement, and the fourth to the perfect, to the realized. So that inner communion is the final state that for the bhakta, we just enjoy the presence itself, and that becomes the enjoyment of life in general. Thus, the only possible beginning is the diminishing and taming of passions. This can only be achieved in the soul by guarding the heart and by attention. For, as the Lord says, out of the heart proceed evil thoughts which defile a man. So it is there that the attention and guarding are needful. When through the heart's opposition to them, passions are completely subdued, the mind begins to long for God, seeking to get close to him, for which purpose it increases its prayer and spends most of its time praying. From this longing for God and praying, the mind acquires strength and chases away all thoughts which circle around the heart seeking entry, and strikes them down with prayer. Then warfare begins, and with a great roar the evil demons rise, and through the passions raise mutiny and storm in the heart. But by the name of Jesus Christ, all of this is dissolved and vanishes, like wax in a flame. Yet even when banished and driven out from the heart, the demons are not quelled, but make other attempts to disturb the mind, from without, through the senses. But here again, the mind very soon restores and begins once more to feel its usual quiet, for they have no power to disturb its depths, but can manage only to ruffle its surface, right? And even, yes, Ganga, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I didn't want to interrupt.
No.
It's really interesting that you mentioned earlier. I really liked the comparison of like demons to samskaras and like negative habits. I never had made that uh, analogy before. It's really neat. But it's interesting to hear this language again. I grew up in a Catholic environment and like I was scared out of my mind of this stuff as a kid. And I find in my practice that like sometimes I'm like just wrestling with this idea. Like I'm wrestling with this idea of an external evil or an external place that I could fall into, you know, and it's difficult to reconcile it sometimes with this like very, I guess, uplifting and confidence, brave, strong, Vedantic ideal. I always think of Swami Vivekananda. So it's a sin to think ye sinners. And it's like, it's true. And it's helped me so much. But it's difficult to reconcile with my love, you know, my love for Christianity and the faith that I grew up with. Like, I can see where it's helpful, but it's like, it's really something that I just find myself wrestling with, you know. I still fear it in a way sometimes. My mind does, that is. My level of the mind, I'm just like, that sounds very spooky and scary.
Yeah, yes, that's a gentle conversation to have sometime. Christianity has definitely, in the second half of its life, been more interested in these kinds of things, because that is one of the fundamental problems of Christian theology, is what to do with Satan. They've built that concept up into an individual, you know, who's almost on par with God. And if you have an absolute evil, you have to give it a source. And if you're going to source an absolute evil and not blame it on God, which people are very uncomfortable to do in the Christian world, then you've got two gods. And it's one of these things that really causes a lot of trouble. That's why Vivekananda says, you know, that evil is not a thing in and of itself. It's the shadow of the light. It's the absence of the presence of love. So evil is just an absence of the presence of love. Now, if God is everywhere present and always perfect, how do we get an absence of love? Through ignorance alone, through a lack of awareness, which is exactly what he's bringing us to here. That this thing that we call evil, this thing that looks evil, this thing that is the dark, is only God being shaded by our ignorance, by our distraction from him, by paying attention to the changing, by paying attention to the senses and the mind alone, and being driven by ego, being driven by our identity with the changing, our identity with the body and mind. And so all of those things in the Christian world that have been, what do they call that when you give something anthropomorphized? Yeah, I think that's the word. So they took evil and they gave him, they put it into a character named Satan so they could talk about it and have a way of identifying it. And then all of the demons are just basically all of the things that the ego would be interested in. So Satan is really just another word for ego. And all of the demons would just be all of the things that the ego is interested in. Good foods, good pleasures, good friends, all of the throngs of the changing world. And so our samskaras and experiences of those things are then the individual demons, and their power resides in our habit, resides in the number of times that we've served them through ignorance. And so when we come to this state where we are returned to the strength of mind, which means we've come to know our nature, to not be body mind, to not be the changing, and we find this inner strength, then we're able to escape the power of these armies, which will seem like an army of things, because all of your bad habits are going to come to try and get you to come back to the party, initially. But because of your discernment, which is pretty new, and your renunciation, which is also pretty new, you're a little bit shaky, and these guys seem a little bit stronger than what they are, because you still have a little bit of love for them, and because you still are affected by the habit. The new habit has not yet arisen, has not yet been established. And so, but in time, through the habit, through good habits, we forget the older habits. They lose their power over us, and this army of demons diminish. Swami Prabhupada once said to me, he says, because in Vedanta art also, you see lots of demons, hideous demons, and we also anthropomorphize them, give them names and whatnots. And I asked him about that one time, and he said, when I asked him about Sri Lanka, how could that be the home of the demons? Sri Lanka is just a country. And he said, yes, it's true. He says, demons in Vedanta are just people who are unconcerned with godliness. So people who are not looking for their nature, not looking for truth, are the demons. And so they're not a separate thing. They're not, horrible monsters. They're just people who are comfortable with ego and the world of egoism, and are happy to find their identity there. And so that's what a demon is. It's not actually a monster, but you can see why they turn into monsters in the theology, right? Because
Thank you for.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No.
Thank you
That's
for
all right.
sharing that.
Surely.
There was something I wanted. You mentioned that very great take. A lot of the church fathers, and well, I say a lot, but it's a strong voiced minority of the church fathers in Eastern Orthodoxy would agree with you. And I'm pretty sure you know that. I just remembered, I think you went to Bible school and probably have a lot of knowledge behind this stuff. I'm like an armchair Christian theologian person, and I've been since I was a kid. And this always troubled me very deeply. And now in this tradition, I feel this need to reconcile my understanding of Christianity with the Christianity that Thakur experienced. Because I don't have the intellectual luxury of dismissing Christianity altogether. Thakur doesn't let me get off that easy.
Yeah, no, and you shouldn't. This is something that's important, and what you're saying is true. Uh, when I first became a Vedantin, when I first moved into the monastery, because all that happened at the same time, I went through a couple of years of having to deal with a guilt inside that I had toward betraying Jesus. And I just felt like I was being untrue. And yet when I discerned, when I sat, because I spent much time in the shrine praying about that and trying to work my way through it. And part of my discernment was this understanding that Thakur had not asked me to do anything that Jesus would not have asked me to do. That all of the virtues and all of my goals were exactly the same as they were in Christianity. And then I guess about 4 or 5 years into it, the final gift came to me, I guess. I don't know. That's how I refer to it. And that was this really deep conviction that that which was Jesus and that which was Buddha and that which was Krishna and that which was Ramakrishna are the same person. That it is God that comes back again and again and again to teach us. And now that has grown in me to the point where nowadays I don't even recognize different religions. I feel that's just part of ignorance, that there is only religion. And you don't even need the word because there's nothing but religion. Life is religion. Life is spiritual. It's our nature. We will go through these practices whether we are religious or not, because the universe itself is bringing us to the beloved. The universe itself is the presence of God and is bringing us to our enlightenment. In the end, love wins. And so that's how I worked through those things. I still consider myself Christian, but not to the exclusion of anything else. I also consider myself Vedantin. And sometimes I'll even cop to being a Hindu. It's like these things are just names. It's like what I really am is love itself, trying to find a perfect expression of this nagging sense that I have that I can do better at that, that I can open my gate wider, that I can care more deeply, that I can be more loving than I am, and that I can let go and want to let go of all of the habits and things that I've run after that have turned me into the person that can't love freely, to a person who's more concerned about my own well-being or my own condition or my own attention than I am about others. And so I will bow down to all of the incarnations and love them deeply, because to me they're the same person who's so committed that they've come back again and again and again and suffered almost every time at our hands, as it were, and yet continually return. And so but it's up to you how you deal with that. But understand, Vedanta will never ask you to do anything that Jesus didn't. And that Jesus, Ramakrishna had a vision of Jesus, actually. And the picture that we have that hangs in the monastery in San Francisco, where I joined and where I lived for 15 years, there's a beautiful portrait of Jesus. And it's the very portrait that in the gospel, Ramakrishna has the experience of Jesus coming out of that portrait as light and entering into his own heart. And at another time, he has the same experience with Buddha entering into his heart. And then he tells Vivekananda toward the end of his life, he who was Krishna and he who was Rama is now before you as Ramakrishna, and not in your Vedantic sense. Meaning not in the sense, oh, we're all God, so I'm Rama and Krishna. He's like, no, not in that sense. He who was Rama and he who was Krishna is now this before you. And so that's where that idea was given to me. And just through discernment, my inner self has accepted that, and now thrown off almost all the other differences in addition to it. You know, when you just see it as this wonderful story that all of these religions and these avatars were not meant to be isolated. They weren't meant to have been crystallized into a thing and given a name and a tag that belonged to a period of time in a country. That was never intended to happen. That's the effect of ego. That's what ego has done with religion. Religion has been an unstoppable flow of life from the very beginning and will carry us all the way through to the end. It's like it is the movement of the entire universe to realize itself, to produce that pure love, that pure isness, or perhaps it's the realization that it is that already, when it's not interpreted from an ego's perspective, that it's already that pure love, already that pure existence. All right, let me just finish reading because we've only got one more paragraph here, two more paragraphs, but we'll finish this, the Philokalia, this section, and go back to the other book next week. So the demons lose their power and they're only able to ruffle the surface of the mind. But the mind is not yet able to free itself from warfare completely and to be uncontrolled by attacks of the evil demons. This is the attribute only of the perfect, of those who have completely renounced everything and whose attention remains ceaselessly in the heart. That's where we're all going. It's a scary thought as an ego to think, oh my God, that's my annihilation. No, it's not your annihilation. It's the annihilation of ego. Worry not. Thus, if a man practices all this in due order, doing each thing at its appointed time, which is to be where you're at, you know, don't let the ego convince you you're farther ahead or you're able to do something better, that you don't have to go through the same things that everybody else does. That's for losers. Don't listen to that stuff. Do what your teacher says, be where you are, do the practice that you're doing and be patient. Be patient with yourself. Then when his heart is purified from the passions, he will be able to give himself up entirely to psalmody, to struggle with thoughts, to look up at heaven with his bodily eyes, or to contemplate it with the inner eyes of his soul, and to pray in true purity as he should. Still, it is advisable to gaze up at heaven with bodily eyes as seldom as possible for fear of the evil demons which are to be found in the air. All right. They are called spirits of the air because they produce in the air various forms of prelest or pride. So we must take care. God demands only one thing from us, that our heart be purified by means of attention. All right. That's the only thing God demands of you. That's an amazing thing, is this purity of inner awareness, this awareness of awareness that's never dropped for distraction, never dropped by avoidance, by being carried away by something else. God demands only one thing from us, that our heart be purified by means of attention. As to the rest, it will be as the apostle said, if the root be holy, so are the branches. But if a man begins to lift his eyes and his mind to heaven and imagines something in his mind, doing it not in the order we have indicated, he will see dreams, something false instead of true, which is Maya. He's describing Maya right here. Something false instead of true, because his heart is not pure. Thus, as we have said more than once, the first and second methods of attention and prayer do not lead a man to achievements. When we wish to build a house, we do not put on the roof before building the foundation. For to build a house this way is impossible. First, lay the foundations, then build the house, and only then put on the roof. So also must we do in relation to spiritual things. First, lay the foundation, that is, start to guard the heart and cleanse it from passions. Then build the spiritual house, that is, repulse the insurrections against us, raised by the evil spirits through the outer senses, and learn to cut off such attacks as quickly as possible. And only then should we put on the roof, that is, complete renunciation of everything, in order to give ourselves up entirely to God. In this way, we shall complete our spiritual house in Jesus Christ, to whom be the glory forever. Amen. All right. That is that chapter of the Philokalia, that essay by Saint Simeon, the new theologian. All right, so all of those demons and things, those really in Vedanta are just your samskaras, your bad habits. The demons of the air are just your wrong thinking about who and what you are and what your relationship to the whole is. And all of the untruth that you'll see as a curse is actually Maya, which is what we are experiencing now from our ego perspective, a world of war, a world of selfishness, a world of hatred. But in fact, when we get our eyes purified, we will see that this is a world of love, that every war is for an ideal, every bit of suffering is an opportunity for introspection, for learning, for growing and transcending. So anybody have another question or an idea? Okay.
Swami, I appreciate your talking, discussing with Ganga about Christianity and your faith. I really appreciate that. It's very important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, that would help me too.
Cool. Yeah, and I still every now and then pepper my mantra with the Jesus prayer.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
I'll look up and wink at Mother and slip in a Jesus prayer and turn to Thakur and wink again and return to my other prayer. So yes, do whatever you need to do, but be at peace with God, with the divine ideal, and all will be well anyway, because Thakur says we all get home. Nobody's left behind. So trust that and be free. All right?
Thank you,
Thank
Swami.
you, Swami. Thank you.
Ji.
Wonderful.
Indeed. Be well.